bit late, so instead of me waffling on and giving an introduction, which we probably don't need, especially if you've been down watching the discussion in the main hall with Robert Madlin, he brought up some of the issues that we're probably going to talk about here on the panel. So straight away, I'm going to introduce, far at the end, we have Joost Poort, who is the Senior Economic Researcher for Information Law at the University of Amsterdam. Then Anders Erlandsen, who's the Senior Advisor at Ericsson Consumer Labs, so we're going to get this panel very much the consumer angle. Augustin Reina, who's the Senior Legal Officer at BEUC. Nadine Karbach, who is the Vice Chair of Impetus. And Richard Gulbis, who is the Copyright Advisor at the Supreme Court of Latvia. So, without further ado, we're going to let everybody set out their stalls so we all know what angles everyone's coming from. So, let's start with you, and there's a microphone there.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for being invited here. Just to make sure, I work at the Institute for Information Law at the University of Amsterdam, but I work there as an economic researcher. And what I wanted to do as a warming up for my angle on this, show you a few slides, yes. So
Stand up if you like.
I did quite some research and consumer research on the topic of file sharing and the consumption of media products. And this is, in my opinion, quite an important graph for the Netherlands, which I think shows a trend which also occurs in many other countries. And I coined it Elvis is returning to the building. What we see here is that the first bars for all types of content, I don't know if they're legible from there, show the 2008 file sharing share of the population. So in 2008, more than 30% of the population was engaging in file sharing music. But in 2012, it had dropped to 22%. Whereas for films and series, it had increased from 10 to 18% over that same time span. And if you take the whole share of file sharing over all content types, you see a significant drop from about 35%, one-third of the population, to a bit more than 25%. This was even before the Court of Justice ruled that sharing of downloading from illegal sources was in fact illegal, which we in Holland were the last to find out. So what's going on here, as I said, Elvis is returning to the building. My main conclusion from that would be that you can compete with free. The industry has often said you can't compete with free, therefore you have to do all kinds of enforcement measures. I think you can compete with free. It's like selling bottled water. You just have to be better than that. And if I can show the next slide. This is also a bit of good news. I won't go through all the numbers here, but you see that basically for any type of content, we compare here the number of the percentage of the population that consumes a certain type of content from legal sources here, purchased offline, paid for downloading, free legal downloading, and we compare the group that actually also downloaded from illegal sources with the group that didn't do so in the last year. And what you see in almost any figure here is that the percentage of the people that also engaged in file sharing is much higher for legal consumption. So my conclusion here is file sharers are the industry's largest customers. So to wrap that all up, I'd say a digital single content market for copyrighted product does already exist. The problem is it is illegal. But consumers are willing to go for legal offers if they're good enough, if they're better than illegal offers. And I think the music industry is doing very well in that respect. Audiovisual industry is still having a lot to learn. They have this obsession with fragmentation and separating windows in time, in space. But consumers nowadays are the green generation. They want it all and they want it now. So I think it's imperative for the industry to give consumers what they want, basically.
Okay, pass on the microphone rather than the baton.
All right. Okay, so I'm Anders Erlandsen. I work at Ericsson Consumer Lab. I also have a couple of slides and a video to actually share what Consumer Lab does and put the things that I'm going to talk about into a bit of context. Just before that, I'd like to say that within Consumer Lab, we do a lot of consumer research every year. We cover more than 40 countries globally, interviewing more than 100,000 people every single year. So with all these interviews, both online surveys and in-home interviews, we gain a lot of insights into the mind of the consumer. So obviously, that's what I'm going to talk about today. Maybe we can actually start with the video.
Finally, a family weekend. Anna thinks as she witnesses her 3 children dash back and forth between the movie sections. They've already ended up renting the same film 4 times this year. She knows this, but still she gladly lets the endless charade of touching, comparing, and feeling the plastic covers continue.
Yeah, so change will never be as slow again. I'm actually going to start by kicking in, hopefully, an open door to talk about how consumers, since 2011, on a weekly basis, the people who actually watch any type of streamed on-demand content has increased from 68% that do it at least once a week up to 83% last year. And if we click once more, we'll see how physical media, DVD, Blu-ray, VHS viewing, all those physical medias are instead showing a decline. Hardly surprising, right? And we actually see this across markets. Because these numbers are those 9 markets that have been included in our survey back already since 2011. But if we look at a couple of European markets, if we click, we'll see UK, we'll click again, we'll see Germany, and once again, and we'll see Spain, and you can see very similar trends. The online on-demand is increasing for all the markets, whereas the physical media is declining. But again, this is well-known facts, right? But what we see here is actually across devices, the amount of hours the consumers think that they are spending on each screen. We can see that the TV screen, nothing much is happening. It's kind of stable, but the growth is happening on the mobile screens. That's where consumers are spending more and more time. And that also means, of course, if you spend more time on the mobile screens, some of that viewing will be at home, as you can see the orange, and some of it will be away from home. And if you're at home or in buildings, it's likely to be Wi-Fi, right? But otherwise, it's going to be cellular, it's going to be mobile data. And if you click again, we'll see the Ericsson mobility report that was launched just a few days ago. There's estimates growing from 2014 to 2020. We're estimating a 13-time growth when it comes to video the video viewing or the video traffic in the mobile networks. So already today, 45% of all the data in the mobile networks come from video viewing. And that's estimated to be as much as 60% by 2020. A huge portion. And of course, when traffic grows this much, that will also mean private investments in those mobile networks because things need to happen there. But for a consumer, if you look at it from the consumer perspective, there is a challenge because the consumer are paying the mobile provider for his connectivity for his smartphone. And then he's paying the service provider, could be Netflix or it could be some other TV provider, for the content. But right now, they're not aligned. So for example, if you run out of data bucket, you can't use the video service that you're already paying for. So here, from a consumer angle, there are things that could happen as well. Last slide. Already touched upon this. For the consumer, there are no borders. Consumers are online, particularly if you talk about the millennials, but actually everyone is getting online. We've heard a lot about this already yesterday as well. And not only are they online, they're also traveling to an extent they've never done before. If you look at data, for example, from the European Union themselves, 271 million tourist trips lasting at least one overnight stay within the European Union in 2012. That's huge. There's a lot of people traveling. And as you can see, the numbers for London, for Barcelona, for Paris, the amount of visitors, they are staggering. So there's a lot of people moving around, and that, of course, means that there is a need to access content. Because what consumers are saying, 33% are saying, it's very important to get access to my content wherever I am, even if I'm in a different country. So it is extremely important to actually cater for that. And that was actually, in fact, we have a lot of data supporting what we talked about around piracy as well, and we see very similar numbers when it comes to the decrease of piracy across the board.
Okay, Augustin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. And to start, I would like to say that I simply fully agree and confirm what the previous speakers have said in relation to consumer consumption trends. And our members, consumer associations across Europe, carry out surveys and in touch with consumers. And it is clear that they are willing to pay for legal content if the offers were affordable and of quality. But unfortunately, we do have an extremely fragmented market when it comes to copyrighted products, and the most critical sector is the audiovisual, as you know. And this is basically for two reasons. On one side, we have differences in national copyright regimes, but also we have to face with exclusive licensing practices, which are based on territoriality and release windows. But as you know, the internet is one huge market, and right holders should stop seeing it as a sum of different national markets, because otherwise we will never address the problematic of piracy. How can you expect that a consumer will have to wait 1, 2, 3 months before specific content becomes available in his own country when it's already available online by different sources? But what I would like to focus now in this next minutes, it's about how territoriality does not only harm consumers, but also creators. Because we see that territoriality actually prevents creators to reach consumers outside national borders and prevent them from a latent consumer demand. Because if we think that one of the key pillars of the EU is the free circulation of citizens, so we have living abroad, around 14 million citizens are registered in different countries across the EU, let alone those that are not registered or are traveling for different reasons. And this has a special impact for small film producers, because they cannot reach their fellow compatriots outside. And they are actually preventing them from distributing the contents beyond those national borders. And this is not about abolishing exclusive licenses or preventing national adaptation, because of course there will be consumers that will be willing to wait until the content becomes available in their own language with subtitles, or will simply just to go to the cinema. This is about enabling people access content that is available in a foreign market, that like the locals. That's all. It's not about interfering about how the content should be distributed nationally. It's about simply enabling access. And the EU has the powers to address these problems. It has regulatory powers and it has enforcement powers. Regulatory powers, we're going now through the revision of the copyright legal framework. We have to see what can be done in the frame also of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive if we want to target specifically the problematic of audiovisual content. But also we have enforcement powers. We have a clear rule of non-discrimination on the basis of the nationality or the country of residence of the consumer extended to the IP address that needs to be enforced because it's already there. And we need to define what could be, and Rosemary mentioned this morning, the justified reasons. And from our perspective, differences in copyright system or exclusive licenses are not objective justified reasons to block for accessing content that is available in other countries. And also we'll have to see what is the role that EU competition law can play. Because one of the executive hands of the EU is the enforcement of EU antitrust rules by the European Commission. And I think that here it can play an important role because territoriality and exclusivity limits consumer choices. Thank you very much.
Well, we do have some of those creators on the next panel, so we'll see to what degree they agree with you. Nadine, you've worked a lot with young people, so perhaps you give us a slightly different perspective on what matters to the youth consumer.
Yes, that's indeed the case. So maybe I also stand up, because I prefer also standing. But it's, yeah, indeed, I've been working with young people for the last 10 years, and also with in the digital field for the last 6 years, and I tell you it's not easy to get data for or about young people's attitudes towards internet politics, and this is why we have Impetus, and this is what we found. So I brought you some slides, and we just hop through it, and yeah, so can I have the next one, please? Thanks. So I divided a bit into access, obstacles, and outlook, so we make a 3-hop. Okay, next one, please. So here is just two very impressive lines that marks one very important aspect we need to understand when we talk about young people and the internet. So do you see this line here? Can everyone see this line? Yeah, okay. So this is the average of normal internet users, how often they access the internet or the computer, at least daily, so once per day, across all EU member states. So it's a time flow, so to say, from 2011 to 2014. That's not so crucial, but that you understand why it's so long. So that's the average across the EU. So you see this line here. This is the percentage how often young people, the amount of young people per day access the internet. So you see there's a huge gap. So this, some of you, so there's 60% and these are 80%. So that's 20 percentage points. And I think that marks very remarkable, the different perception, the different online digital reality we have between generations. And this is the reality of young people generations. Okay, can I get the next one, please? Thank you. Okay, so something screwed my PowerPoint presentation. It said sharing online. So basically what young people are sharing online. So 90% of young people at all share stuff online. That's compared to the average user is just about 80% something. So what young people like to share is links. Links, pictures, ratings for goods and services. So in case your goods or your stuff was not good, you can read this online very easy. Then also self-created content. So that's the important part. It's not only about consuming, it's also about producing. So, sorry. I noticed that I talk. So we have 29% for own text, on-produced text, and 15% on-produced videos. So that's to get an idea about the share, about the stuff young people share online. Okay, next one, please. So our obstacles, well, obstacles for young people to either access or to share content online, to produce it, is actually related, for example, to money. There's really young people, I think, would buy or access really good services if there was an appropriate pricing for young people. Maybe you go back when you were below 20 or somewhere in the 20s, you can maybe remember how much money you had. Compared with today, it's slightly different, I hope. But with young people, it's still the case that they don't have that much money. Money is a real cruel issue. And if you would have an offer that allow you to stream or to download or to upload in a legal and affordable way, that would be really great step, really good. So next thing is legal obstacles. So if you want to set up a business, a website, whatsoever, a legal is still vague. It's still unclear what's allowed, what's not allowed. It's for young people, it's not easy to assess what's right and where the borders are and where to get the information from. And there is indeed everyone is doing copyright infringement once per day without even knowing it. So as young people is the same, the percentage may be quite even higher, but that's a problem. Regulation and law is not easy to understand, and it's not, equal. Then we do have this sole mark education. So education is always an obstacle, so we don't know where to find, we don't know how to use some services on the internet. But the point is we need to distinguish education. It's not general that we need education for young people, but we need in particular two specific things. First is learning about coding and understand the impact of code. And the second thing is learn about the internet as such. You know, it's not only having a mouse, having a browser, having an internet flat rate. There's stuff happening behind and in the TCP/IP protocol and whatsoever. So it's about that knowledge you need to know in order to perform as a good citizen and to participate in society. Okay, then there's one important point. This should be a sort of prison lines. So actually it's the fact that young people are often perceived as criminalized because they don't have the money in order to download films or whatever, so they sneak away around as circumvent actual laws. And industry very often says, reacts to it by default, to says as a user you are criminalized per default. So don't copyright, don't share the stuff, keep it for you, and that applies in particular for young people, so that they are per default criminalized, and that's not the case. Then we do have a point that we would like to pay the artist and not the intermediate. And last but not least, the topic of surveillance. So in case I post something, I create something, what's about surveillance? What about data tracking? What about profiling? Okay, then I have a last one, I think. The one I will share you, the one we said is, there's some quotes I have from young people I asked yesterday. So I said I'm going to be here and I'm going to include it. So that's for you. So for example, this is what we said. They don't want to be criminalized in gray areas because the translated version of a movie is not yet available, but it is available in the country actually. So this is what you just said. So a young person also said, so we are on this. And we need to write to quote movies as we can quote literature, for example. So why is there no way to quote a reference to a movie as we can do with literature? Just a couple of examples. Okay, I think I have a last one, and that it is. So, for example, what we can propose in looking forward is not only about complaining, but it's also a way forward. So, for example, there are privacy icons. It's very much about privacy. So, it's about what I am willing to share and what others can do with my data. So if I can put an icon on the data I share and say, okay, this is what you're going to do allowed with it and what's not, I think that puts the power back to the young people, to the consumer, what the other person receiving the data is actually allowed to do with it. Then it would be very helpful to have low-cost flat rates or whatsoever, something that's tailored to young people's needs. And then we do have to distinguish between public open data and private data. So if you want to assess public data, that's okay. What you do with it, like in the open data thing. But for private data, there has to be a different treatment with it, with personal data. Then why there is no second-hand market for used films, books, whatsoever. They had a service in the US, had to be cancelled last year because big companies were not in favor of it. So why not having a second-hand market? And last, but maybe the most important thing is talk with young people. They're part of the solution, not part of the problem. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Finally, well, you mentioned there the legal elements and criminalizing people. So, I mean, Richard, you're from speaking from a legal background. So, tell us a little bit whether you agree with Nadine or not.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for kind invitation. I will speak from actually two perspectives. As a former policymaker, I worked for Ministry of Culture of Latvia and participated in the elaboration of some directives also, and also from perspective of court system of as I'm now working as a scientific advisor for Latvian Supreme Court. And first, I totally agree with previous speakers that we should enhance access of content across borders. However, we shouldn't forget to ensure that rich cultural diversity of Europe is maintained. And I think it's also in the interest of all consumers of Europe to have this rich cultural diversity, not to have one European Hollywood here in one or some countries, but to have this variety of audiovisual content we have now, and therefore we should look for targeted approaches, for targeted solutions at the legal level. And of course, to achieve more accessibility of content, we need higher level of harmonization at the EU level of copyright framework. However, we, as a policy makers, you always face a challenge to find the right balance, not between only interests of different stakeholders, but I think much more important is to find right balance between legal certainty, which you would like to achieve, and which is, I believe, very important for legitimacy of the copyright system. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, you need to have future-proof solutions, future-proof legal framework, which is not easy to balance. And it's of course very popular to say, well, we go for more legal certainty and we go for more legal flexibility, but it's quite often it's very hard to combine these two aims. And one more issue I would like to raise is that from perspective of courts, of national courts, and I believe also from the perspective of European Court of Justice, it's important to have harmonized application of legal framework. And it's not enough to have regulations or even single copyright title in order to achieve unified regulation and in the praxis. And we have seen, I think, a lot from the practice of European Court of Justice, of the case law of European Court of Justice, that's very hard to predict how will decide this European Court on the next issue, which seems to be quite so already dealt with to some extent in previous decisions, but you never know which principle will be given more priority in a particular case. So you lose this predictability and you lose legal certainty, therefore. And next, you see a great divergence in how this court decisions are applied in the national courts. Let's take one example, notion of public, which is important when you apply public performance rules. It is interpreted by European Court of Justice in the way that, for instance, one of the criteria that you have to have very large number of people in order to build in order to acknowledge that there is a public. But what does very large mean? Who can answer how many people it is? And from my experience, there are very different interpretations at national level. There are countries which say it's some 2-3% already built public, and then there's 20-25. So I think so. What should be done in order to decrease this level of uncertainty on the level of application is to make some legal backup for cooperation mechanisms between national courts, between competent authorities, when we consider every legislative solution, when we amend copyright framework. We can see it in the CRM directive. There is some mechanisms for cooperation of competent authorities, but I think much more can be done. And the second thing I believe that policymakers could make more use of different instruments like reciprocal recognition of regulations. We do not always have to withdraw territoriality principle to achieve more legal certainty. We can have mechanisms like it is in Orphan Works Directive, where if one country recognizes work as orphan work, it is recognized as orphan work in every country of European Union. And then you can make more use of such collective licensing mechanisms as we have in Scandinavian, as extended collective license systems. And then I believe that we should have more space for member states to introduce some new regulations when for instance, for corporate limitations and exceptions. We now have exhaustive list in Information Society Directive and some other exceptions in Database Directive and Computer Program Directive, Software Directive. But from my perspective as former national policymaker, you see it stops you from development of your national law. Even if you see what can be done in order to meet expectations of society and ensure both interests of authors and other right holders and interests of consumers are maintained. You do not have any space for maneuver to introduce even tiny exceptions of copyright. Even ensuring fair remunerations for right holders, you do not have this freedom. So.
Thank you. Well, we will have to see what Mr. Oettinger comes up with later this year. And this week we had the REDA report voted on. And they shied away a little bit from mandatory exceptions across all EU member states. But I'm going to take the sort of central argument that has been certainly amongst to my right here, that people are, consumer behavior and people are happy to pay if they have a way to pay. I mean, people will say that because no one wants to be the bad guy and say, no, I want something for free, even if deep down that is what they want. So, I mean, you're saying this, but have we got evidence that consumer behavior will actually tally with what consumers are saying in surveys? Can anyone give me concrete examples on that? And also, please, do put your questions up here in the Twitter wall using the hashtag DA15Creative. Have anyone else got to challenge what we've heard on this panel?
Well, even though it's hard, of course, to sort of be 100% sure that the data is interpreted the correct way. What we can see when we look at our data is that even in markets where there haven't been a lot of legislative differences, we can still see that the amount of piracy is still going down, and because at the same time we've seen a significant increase in the amount of services that are offering easy to use, user-friendly and reasonably priced services. So take Spain as an example. I don't like to hang out different markets, but for the sake of argument, there we've seen a significant decrease in piracy since 2011, 2012, and actually the amount of legal activities there has not been really on the same level. So it happened even before, that decrease happened even before the stuff that has happened on the legal basis. So yes, I think we can safely say that things are happening the way that you're asking.
Yep.
Yeah, I see the same thing in my research, a significant trend down for downloading music, up for legal services. So I think that is really happening. What is not happening is that people are actually suddenly becoming high moral persons. So and that's my concern, especially for the audiovisual industries. People want to see both Game of Thrones and House of Cards, but they're not going to have two subscriptions to video services. So what they will do, and they will continue doing, and even if enforcement measures are taken, they will continue doing it, is subscribe to one, which is the best, the most user-friendly, or the best price perhaps, and download the stuff they can't find on the one from illegal sources because they want to see them all. But you can't expect consumers to go about different platforms, and you don't expect people to walk into a bookshop and say, sorry, we don't sell that book because that's from a publisher that's blocked here. So why for audiovisual?
Well, people do that with, we say, for Android versus our Apple operating systems. People do say, I will go with one, not the other.
And the results are then you ended up criminalizing people. And it's all about quality offers. And addressing consumers' expectations. What they want to consume, where they want to consume it. And I'm glad that you mentioned the case of the music sector, because streaming, and we heard yesterday from the colleague from Spotify, is saving the music sector from piracy. And we have concrete data, for example, in Norway, data from ISPI, so right holder, that shows that streaming actually have helped illegal download to drop to something like 4%, almost nothing. The question is whether the audiovisual sector will take that as an example, and they will start offering, offering offers for their redundance that actually address, what consumers want to consume and when they want to do it.
Nadine, you want to answer? And then we have a question in the back of the room.
Thank you very much. Actually, I also wanted to make the 2 points about I do think there's definitely a market also for young people, because you just want to pay something because being criminalized is even worse. So if you have those two options about being perceived as criminalized and really caught by a huge law industry, compared with maybe a couple of bucks a month, it's not so a hard choice. So that's the first thing. And second thing, also taking up the example of the music industry, they also made this very easy. For example, from Spotify, you have easy access service for free. So a very basic, of course, you have commercial with it and so on and so forth. But if you want, there is a sort of several steps in that business model. And if you want to go for different services and different access, of course, then you pay. And then you pay even in different steps. So I think there are examples, and it would be happy if more industries would follow on this.
Okay, gentleman in the navy suit.
Hi, I'm David Wielden from Sky. I'm actually on the next panel, but I really have to challenge the nonsense that you were just talking about, how people only want to buy one pay service. It's just not true. And all the evidence suggests the opposite. You just need to look at the reports of the markets where there are multiple pay services. Let me give you the example from the UK. The vast majority of Netflix customers in the UK are also Sky subscribers. And that's because they're used to paying for content. I suggest you go and read the respected Enders Analysis report on this. It's very clear that actually people are very happy to buy multiple services to get what they want, and actually people who are inclined to pay for content will generally pay for more content. And that's why our industry and our market is so dynamic and moving so quickly.
I must say that from our own research within Consumer Lab, I tend to agree with you, actually. We see, but depending on which consumer segments, because there are clearly segments that can afford maybe only one service or two. But if you look at the overall market, yes, there are definitely room for multiple services, and we see particularly actually in the millennial group people subscribing to 2, 3, 4 over-the-top services. But maybe they're actually, once they start with service number 4, they actually stop service number 1 because they felt, well, I don't actually need Amazon Prime anymore because it's enough with the Netflix and HBO Go. But yes, we clearly see that depending on your financial situation, obviously, there is clearly interest in multiple services. But if the number of services become too many, then we introduce other complexities in finding the right content that you're actually looking for. But that's a different story.
Well, I mean, we've got lots of different sorts of content, and that'll become very clear on the next panel when we see some sort of traditional creatives versus modern digital creatives. But let's talk about the difference between paid-for content and free content and geo-blocking. I mean, we have services in various countries where there's broadcasters that's for free. I mean, how do you guarantee that these broadcasters can still produce cultural output and at the same time allow everybody in Europe to access it? I want you to solve this problem right now.
And then I pick up my economic Nobel Prize. So when you refer to free content,
yep.
You're talking about like platforms like Spotify.
Spotify, for example,
so it's always
BBC,
legal sources.
YouTube, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, entirely. But actually, I believe there is nothing for free. No. So when you subscribe to this type of services, either you are exposed to advertising, and now actually the advertising paying to the supplier, or they are monetizing your personal data. So it's a different type of currency, actually.
Okay. So, gentleman in the glasses.
Yes, hi, my name is Jürgen Gren. I'm a member of the cabinet of Vice President ANSIP. So, yeah, this is a very good discussion to listen into. I had a question to Birk. You mentioned 14 million people living outside of their home borders, as it were. Do you have any other figures on the type of consumption that they may have, or say if they rented one movie a month or something like that, what that would mean for the content industry in terms of broadening the market? Thank you.
Well, I think this is actually you're representing the views of Mr. Ansip, who has said that we're talking about a lot of people who move between countries, so geo-blocking is a real issue. But I have heard the opposite argument coming from various actors who want to support the sort of territoriality principle, saying, actually, it's only a very smooth, it's very few people live in different countries compared to the EU as a whole. Does anyone want to sort of perhaps react to that? Do you have those figures?
No, I don't.
No? Okay, lady in
so
the... you can.
I can provide if you want some. So if this is what I referred at the beginning, the case of the latent consumer demand. And you have, for example, relatively small countries. No, if you take the case of Sweden, where you come from, Lithuania, Latvia, of course, then we can see that, and we have the data, for example, from Eurostat about all these people that living abroad. No? So if we just take, and I think there will be an interesting exercise for the European Commission, to take into account, for example, the number of expat people living abroad, from a small country, and then see how take one specific platform, in that country, which distribute content only specifically for that country, and what will be the turnover of that platform if they will enable those fellow compatriots that are even outside the country to actually buy from them without necessarily being geo-blocked. And I think that looking at the small markets, and the small platforms are actually the ones that we want to protect. As you said, we don't want to have European Hollywood. Although it would be good to have a European Hollywood, what we don't want to have is an American-led Hollywood, and territoriality will lead us to that, because we are not enabling people to access. And something very interesting that Robert Madlin said yesterday, we want a multilinguistic, Europe, and enable people to access content, in original language, for example, that contribute to that. It's all about the European integration and raising the values, of Europe's culture.
Okay, well, hands went up. Yes, Nadine, and then, yep.
Thank you very much. Maybe adding one thing where you can get more figures about young people, for example, being abroad, that you may consult the EU Erasmus program. For example, when you're going abroad with your studies and you would like to access your favorite movie or whatsoever, then good luck with it. And there may be some more figures to see how many young people are affected actually by this.
Well, concrete figures are always good. Unfortunately, we don't have them all to hand. Yes, lady.
Yes, my name is Edith Sepp, and I'm actually from Estonian Film Institute, but I represent the European Film Funds and the head of... it's very interesting you said, Dr. Joos said that obsession with fragmentation in film. This is a very strong statement, I suppose, because I have a simple question. If we are cutting off the territorial licensing, where should the money come from? To young people and to the music, young people don't think, where does the money come to produce the quality content? And the music is slightly different, because in film business, you need 30% from the budget is coming from broadcasters up front, before you go into the production. So a very simple question: if everything is free and we want to let everything free, where should the financing come from?
Well, my point is absolutely not that everything should be free. My point would be that people are, in fact, willing to pay for content. So the money will be on the table, but it will be in a different shape, in a different distribution, a different form, and a different timing than you are always expected, than it used to be. So maybe the 30% is a historical figure that you need to forget about.
But this is love. Let's talk about very famous film, but won the Oscar and also Cannes. It was this budget 30% came from the broadcasters, from different broadcasters all around Europe.
Okay,
Just
very briefly.
One reaction very briefly. I think it's true. It's very important to see where the financings come from. I agree. And something interesting that I was looking at the other day. So the EU media program, they support the development and distribution of films, activities and festivals. And one of the objectives of this program is to increase the circulation of works outside the EU, and strengthen the audiovisual sector. From 2007 to 2013, 750 million euros were allocated to this project. For the next 6 years, there is a budget of 1.4 billion euros for European work to help actually those small producers. So I think when we talk about financing, we have to look at the whole picture, and this is just European figures. We have also national budget. They look just at the French cultural budget, and actually, I wouldn't give over dimension, to the pre-financing system, of exclusive licenses, because there really I don't think that the whole money will go actually to the.
I don't think we're going to solve that issue today. There's two gentlemen in the back. I'll hear both of your questions, and then we'll give it to the panel. So. Microphone, please. Wait, sorry, can you pass it back here? Oh, good.
Yeah, just wanted to. My name is Matt Moy at the Premier League, so football league in England. I just wanted to follow up on Jürgen Gren's question and Augustine's comments. Actually, the figures about what people want to consume and how much they want to pay. There is actually a commission study from 2012, which is an interesting one. I think it was done by Plum TNS. About how much people want to invest into foreign content when it comes to audiovisual. So the figures are interesting, just for Jorgen to have a look, because figures are quite tiny. Just following up on Augustine's comments. So 14 million, roughly 3% of the EU population, if my math are okay. This is quite small. This is not negligible, I agree with you, but it's quite small. When it comes to my content, to sports content, we try to deliver our content everywhere in Europe, and the Premier League is available in all the 27 countries. But there is one big difference, because the content as Football League is very national. So the value of the Premier League is very different according to the countries. Although we're quite popular, and lucky to be popular all around the world, the value of the Premier League in the UK is 10 times more than in the 27 other member states all put together. So obviously there is an issue there, because if the content, the Premier League content is available, the UK content is available in Belgium, it means also that the Belgian broadcasters of the Premier League have to make their content available to the UK market, which is for us the main market. So there we have a problem, because of course we're going to have to make a decision. So I'm afraid the consequence of getting rid of territorial arrangements might be that you're going to end up with just uniform content all over Europe, and that's not what we want. So you might end up with Premier League on the UK broadcasters at the UK price for the rest of Europe, instead of having a tailored content to Belgium, to France, and that's what people want. You keep saying give consumers what they want. I agree with you, totally agree with you. That's what we do, day in, day out. We try with our broadcasters to deliver what people want. And what people want, the huge majority, is a tailored content to their tastes, which are very different according to the countries.
Okay, and let's take the question or the comment next.
Hi, I'm Jari-Pekka Kaleva from the European Games Developer Federation. And I would like to remind you about one important fact. We are discussing here a lot about territoriality in terms of copyright framework. But if you think it's from the creator's perspective, the game developer's perspective, there are actual barriers on other sides as well. The way the data protection framework is implemented, the way the privacy regulation is implemented, the way the consumer protection framework is implemented, the way the VAT framework is implemented, are all fragmenting the digital single market area. And more we have this kind of legal uncertainty, more challenging it's for the creator to actually enter the markets, because they're afraid that they're breaking laws. And that's the reason I was really happy to hear that someone was mentioning already the problems of this is causing, especially for the young creators, people who don't have resources to use this kind of huge consulting companies to pay for the legal certainty. And that's something that has to be addressed as well. Thank you.
Very good point. I think it's almost too vast an area for us to try and cover in the very short time we have. We have a question here. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Zenia Ivashko. I'm with IFPI, actually, so from the music industry side. I mean, it's absolutely great to have this discussion. I think there's a lot of things that require probably more time, but I will just limit myself to saying that there was some references made to the experience in the music industry, and obviously it's great to see that you're focusing a lot on what the consumers want. I think this is a shared perspective for us as well. We want to definitely develop and continue developing as many offers for the consumers as to satisfy all the different types of demand. But that's actually a really important point, because there is not such a thing as a single consumer, as the music consumer. And in our sector, we've seen a lot of different preferences. So we've seen, yes, the rise of streaming, but at the same time, the rise of some physical formats, vinyl is going up. So that is to really say that we can't draw certain simplistic conclusions that, for example, the fall of illegal downloading in a particular country means that piracy has gone down. Certain modes of accessing music have actually taken over in certain territories. And these are the different preferences, but we should really be careful about the conclusions we are drawing from it. So for our sector, I wanted to say that we have this great study that has come out from Ipsos Media that actually looks into this. So if anybody's interested, Ipsos Media, Global Consumer Perspectives, that's the source. But just coming back and following up on this discussion about territoriality, I think it would be really helpful to look at it as also an enabler of satisfying consumer demand, because at the end of the day, what territoriality allows us to do from the creator's side is to provide a made-to-measure solution to satisfy these different consumer needs. And this is like attacking a metric system. At the end of the day, it's about providing the contracts that satisfy the consumer in a particular market, a particular need. But don't throw the baby with the bath. It's about not throwing away the metric system, and territoriality, copyright, and linked.
Okay, we are 5 minutes from the end, and there's 5 of you that have to have something to say, so even my maths can handle that. But I just want to almost set this up for our, after our coffee break, our next panel, and ask you sort of to quickly sum up in 20 words, and also say whether you think the word that was just raised there, pirate or piracy, is helpful or divisive in this debate. Should we be throwing that particular word out with the bathwater or not?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your question.
The question is, are we setting this up as too much of a dichotomy of a battle between two different representations, instead of saying this should be a more collaborative effort? If one side calls one a pirate, is that really unhelpful?
Well, I think a dichotomy is certainly not appropriate here. As I said, pirates are your customers or your future customers. I do sympathize with the idea that tailoring to markets is an essential element of any business. So I think that's a point that will also be discussed in the next session. And I think I'm running out of my 20 words.
I'd just like to add then on top of that consumers aren't really all that bothered about different aspects of the business models. They couldn't actually care less. They want their content in whatever form they can, and if we can't provide it legally, they will find it illegally through pirate services. So if when we create or maintain solutions that are based on certain setups, if that actually means that they have to go pirate to find the content that they want, they will remain pirates.
Sorry, I fully agree, and I think the discussion is very much focused on this dichotomy between territoriality and addressing consumer demands in a specific national market. I'm over my 20 words, but I will carry on, sorry. And which is, it's true, it's good that providers, creators, they address, the preferences of consumers in each country. And this is not what we are concerned here, because companies and creators and suppliers will have to continue addressing consumers' demand in specific markets if they want to succeed. And this is the main target. The difference is that we want people that are outside those markets to be able to access it. And I'm sorry, I don't buy the argument that we're going to end up with that uniform cultural system, American-like, because still we are composed by 28 different national markets, 28 different national types of consumers. And I think that although that we have heard from right holders mainly that it is about territoriality is important to ensure consumer preferences, but we don't also have to forget that it's also to ensure the maximization of profits of those right holders.
220 words there.
Okay, I try to catch that up. So I try to be brief, and my statement on this is piracy actually can help to shake up existing markets in a way that they overthink their business models and rethink their customers, rethink their services in order to access new ones and reshape services. Thanks.
Well, that is provocative. I think we'll go for that for the opening question of the next panel. But Richard, you know what being called a pirate can end up meaning. So,
thank you. I will try to be brief. I think that term piracy, gives gives some intention to make market-led solutions meet consumer demands better. And another point, I think it's important to provide for consumers information on this legal offer they can use, and that's a particular problem, I think, here in Latvia, that a lot of consumers just don't know where can you legally use content. Because when you have small markets, you do not have such a big promotion campaigns of different services. So it's another angle I think we should consider, and Latvia is also now volunteered for a pilot project to have aggregator of legal offers and to promote this aggregator, to promote information for consumers where they can acquire legal content. And another point is that it's not always clear for consumers whether the content they can find in the internet is legal or not. And that's important to provide this information where they can get content legally.
Okay, well, we are actually bang on time. So we're going to take a coffee break and continue this discussion afterwards. So if you could be back in the room promptly at 11:15, that would be great. Thank you.